You join me here today on a very, very wet winter's day in December. That's winter here in the UK, which means, as you've probably noticed, it's raining. It's raining quite a lot actually. Now today I'm at the wheel of a car that's actually been in our family for over 10 years now. So how this came to be. So how did we come to have this little Fiat 500 in the family? Well, let me take you back a little over 10 years ago to 2011. So my wife had a Mark 1 Ford Ka, or KA if you prefer. The little Ford was a fantastic car. It was her first car, and with the wheel in each corner it was great fun to drive. In fact, to this day I still maintain that it's the one true successor to the original Mini. But that car was several years old and it got to a point where there were a few jobs that needed doing on it, and we started thinking, is it time for a change? And with that comes the Fiat 500. Now this particular Fiat 500 is in lounge trim. Now the lounge trim, when these cars launched, was a comparable price to the Sport. You had 3 basic models throughout most of Series 3 production, if you exclude the special editions, that is. So we had the Pop, which was your entry-level car, which back then you could get into for less than £10,000. Or for a little bit more, you could have a Sport or a Lounge. Both was pretty much the same list price, but you got a trade-off in specification. Sport, as you may expect, had some equipment that made it a little bit sportier, so you had different alloy wheels, a boot spoiler, front fog lamps and a few other things. But you did omit a few luxuries as well, and this is where the Lounge came in. Now this particular Lounge is also fitted with a TwinAir engine. In 2011 the Fiat TwinAir engine was awarded Engine of the Year. It was the lowest emissions of any petrol car in the world at the time, and due to its low emissions it was exempt from London's congestion charging. It was also free for the UK Road Fund licence, the first car in its class to achieve that. So fast forward to today, 10 years later we still have this little Fiat. We've covered around just over 57,000 miles in this car over that time. And as you've probably gathered by now, having owned this car for over 10 years, we do quite like it. Now I'll be the first to admit the steering isn't as sharp as on the Mark 1 Ford Ka, but the car does feel a lot more refined. In fact, this Lounge version, even though it's on the same size wheels and tyres as my S, which I'll leave a link to a video of that review at the end of this one, this car actually does seem to ride a little bit better. I don't know why that is. It's just a little bit less crashy. The steering is quite light, which for most buyers of a Fiat 500 isn't going to be an issue. And to be honest, even when you're pressing on, it's not so light that it feels disconcerting in any way. In fact, the 1.2 litre versions actually have a city button to make the steering even lighter. I honestly can't see why you would need that. The steering is incredibly light in these cars. As much fun as this car is on a country lane, these cars really were designed for urban environments, and it's something the car does very, very well. Now don't be fooled, these cars are regarded by some as being a bit feminine, and I won't fully dispute that, but get one of these cars fitted with the right engine, a 1.4 16 valve or either of the TwinAirs, and they're actually incredibly good fun to drive. And even the 1.2 with 70 horsepower, it's not bad for a car of its size. Today I think the only engine you can get in this body style is the 1 litre hybrid, which I've not experienced myself, but I believe performance is probably comparable to the old 1.2. And part of the attraction of these cars is the growl that you get from these TwinAir engines. To my mind, it's the engine that should have been in the car when it launched around 2007, 2008 by the time we sort of really saw these in any numbers. Obviously it was 50 years after the old or new Nuovo 500 as it was called was launched. And of course the original car, albeit it had its engine at the back, it had a 2-cylinder engine. Yeah, for the size of the car, it's not actually that bad. You do sit quite high in these cars, which some drivers will like. Obviously, everyone seems to be buying SUVs now, so it must be popular to have a high driving position. For me personally, I do find maybe a little long-legged and short-armed to get really comfortable in these cars. But again, if you compare it to cars in this class from a few decades ago, then yeah, the seats are, I wouldn't say they're excessively narrow. Certainly, they're certainly broader than a lot of sports seats that you find in cars now. No, I don't think they really are. I'd say quality is probably better than some Fiats of old. And this started with the Panda that this car is based around. There's a lot of hard plastic in here, you can't deny, but everything does feel quite solid. You know, nothing feels like it's going to break. I wouldn't say there's anything that's sort of excessively creaky in here either. There are a few things obviously on these cars to watch. It's fairly common knowledge that they do like to break door handles. The reason for that is there's a hinge, which is a £5 part on eBay. They do sort of become weak over time and the hinge breaks. If you repair that as soon as you see that there's an issue, it's a very cheap, very easy fix. You can do it yourself in probably less than half an hour. When people don't get them fixed, they leave it. Essentially what then happens is the door handle snaps off and then it becomes something of a larger job. Now in the 10 years of ownership with this car, other than routine service items, we haven't had to do many other things. I think the car's had a battery, tyres, wiper blades, that sort of thing. Beyond that, we did have to do the coolant expansion reservoir on this car a few years ago, and that seems to be a fairly common issue. Through the cycle of heating and cooling, the plastic becomes brittle, and where it meets the outlet pipe, that had started to break down. Again, it weren't a mega difficult fix. The most recent issue we've had with this car, and probably the most costly, was to do with the clutch. Now the clutch on the right-hand drive Fiat 500s is a hydraulic system rather than using a cable or a rod system. Now the hydraulic pipework over time can become corroded and then you get a leak, which is precisely what we had on this car. Now on the TwinAirs, ideally you would replace them in pairs, and for parts and labour that cost around £300. If you have if you buy a 1.2 version of the 500, with those the pipes come with the master and slave cylinders, so you'll probably be looking at close to £500 with parts and labour, but like I say, for that you will be getting both the pipes and the cylinders replaced, and it's the kind of thing you probably only have to do once in the car's lifetime. Yeah, they're a real hoot. I mean, it's not the fastest car in the world. 60 is about 11 seconds, but it feels a lot quicker than it is, and it will put a smile on your face, especially the TwinAir ones. Now, where these cars are really at home is on suburban roads. Not that they're not competent enough on motorways, because they are. Likewise on country roads, but urban areas are what the car was designed for, and it does come into its own. On the Fiat variants at least, the ride is fairly comfortable. We're not talking Rolls-Royce standards of ride quality obviously, but for a small car they are pretty reasonable. Steering's light, still fairly precise. The gear lever falls conveniently to hand as well in this high remote position. Obviously a lot of modern cable operated gear changes can feel a bit stiff or don't always feel particularly direct. This is actually surprisingly snickety. Quite a nice gear change to use. Again, the one in the Mark 1 Ford car was exceptionally good. Whether it's quite on a par with that, I don't know, but compared to any other modern car, I don't think you're going to really find anything better, certainly in this segment. Yeah, these cars are fairly practical. I mean, because you do sit quite high in here, even though it's only a short car, headroom isn't bad, back and front. Legroom, well, it's not brilliant if you had 4 adults, but at a pinch you could do it. The car's fairly affordable to run as well. Now, fuel economy wise, these Twin Airs are never going to do the economy that Fiat claimed. They reckon they were going to do about 70 miles to the gallon. It's not going to happen. Now, I've been doing a bit of mixed driving this morning, so we've done some country lanes and some urban roads. And I've averaged around 45 miles per gallon, which I think is quite respectable. It might not sound a lot, but a lot of other petrol cars, you would probably be into the 30s, possibly even less, on comparable driving. On a good run, this car will quite easily get into the 50s, and I have on occasion seen close to 60 miles per gallon. Now, the real party piece with these cars is the turning circle. The Abarth, by as a side note, has a terrible turning circle. But these little Fiats, they're actually pretty good. They're fairly easy to park too. Obviously, they're not the biggest of cars. The only issue with them, I would say, would be the shape of the rear tailgate. Both from a practical standpoint, as in luggage capacity, because it tapers away towards the top, and the other issue is if you are backing up to something and you haven't got a lot of space, you've got to remember that where the bottom of the glass stops, the bumper is actually a little bit further away, just due to the shape of the car. But generally, visibility is excellent. A lot of modern cars, the windows are very slitty, very much like looking out of a letterbox. But the Fiat's not bad. I mean, the rear window's not as big as something like a Mark II Fiesta, for example. It's just an entirely different generation of car. But by modern car standards, it's pretty good. There's a lot worse. The side windows are quite tall. Pillars are sizable, but again, comparable for the generation of the car. The C-pillars are a little larger, but again, compared to a lot of other cars, these are actually pretty good. Now we're just coming up to a level crossing. Again, it's hardly a Rolls Royce, but they were quite comfortable. Quite a bad road surface here as well, a lot of potholes. I had cars like when I had my DS3, on anything but a perfect road surface, the car would tramline. And that's the problem. Manufacturers seem to have this obsession with fitting larger wheels with lower profile tyres. In fact, these cars were available with a 16-inch wheel. This one's got the standard 15-inch wheels on. Of course, tyres will vary, but you can get a reasonable quality tyre for around £50 odd for one of these, so they're not all that expensive. This car's actually currently riding on Michelin Cross Climates, so these are probably one of the most expensive tyres on this particular wheel size. And the 500s are incredibly popular. As you can see here in this same street, there's two just here right next to me. And of course, the parallel park is the one that people often dread. But to be honest, in the 500, it's an absolute doddle. Now, I really do like this retro look of this car. This sort of retro movement seemed to start off again in the 1990s with cars like the Beetle. Then later on we had the S-Type Jaguar, Rover 75. Obviously the BMW Mini. So, but all this had sort of happened by the year 2000. So the 500 was several years late to the party. But it's gone on to become not only one of the most successful Fiats, but probably one of the biggest selling modern cars. Certainly here in Britain, these cars and increasingly these days the Abarth versions, are incredibly popular. It's a huge market for FCA. Something I was quite disappointed with in my 500S was the dashboard. In that car it's just like a brushed aluminium, silver, but this car has the body coloured dash, and I really like that. So I think this red really pops on this car. The colour of this one is Paso Doble red. You don't get the flat bottom steering wheel on these earlier cars, but at least it's trimmed in leather on this lounge spec car, and we have got all the controls for things like the radio and telephone. There's also a voice control, which is a system, to be honest, I never use. I find it easier just to use the buttons. But something else, this particular version is what was listed as a lounge without climate control. So at that particular moment in time, these cars were equipped with climate control, something I've actually got on my S. Now this car does have air conditioning, the difference being we've got conventional heater controls here rather than the automatic climate control system. It's really not a deal breaker. The climate control is one of those things that's nice to have, but personally I don't think I would spend extra on having it, and at the time it would have saved you about £200 to get this car without climate control. I also really like how these instruments, the ones in my 500S are the TFT display, which is all very nice, but there's something about these old analog needles. I love the way how the revs or the speed sort of chase each other. That's a really nice touch. It gives the car quite a retro feel, even more so these days, being that we have all these TFT screens seem to be appearing everywhere in cars. It's actually one of my gripes. It's not just the TFT screens, but how we seem to be getting cars without any buttons. So you've got to go through screens to do everything now. Thankfully not the case in this car. Now the TwinAir does produce most of its torque at around 2000 revs, which makes it a really easy car to drive, and feels a lot more pokey than what it really should do, much in the sense that a diesel engine does. But that said, even though this car will pull quite happily as it is now at a little over 2000 revs, when you get sort of 3,000 or 4,000 revs, the car really does feel very eager to go. Much above 5,000 though, and you can feel that boost starting to drop away. So should you consider buying a Fiat 500? Yeah, absolutely. If you are buying one as a first car, particularly if you're on a tight budget, I wouldn't worry too much about mileage. These cars generally aren't high milers, but I have known of some that have done 100, 150,000 miles plus. What I would say is key is look for a car that's been well maintained. So if you can get any kind of service history, the Achilles heel with these cars, in many cases sadly, has been the owners. Maybe not from new, but when the cars have got older, I've had a lot of stories of cars that just have not been serviced. Especially if you've got one of these TwinAirs, it's imperative that you change the oil every year, regardless of mileage. If you change your oil every year, change your spark plugs every other year, you really shouldn't have a problem with these. In fact, the TwinAirs are chain driven. The 1.2s are belt driven, but in reality, that engine's been around forever and they are very tried and tested, so provided you get a good one, you can't go wrong with either. Use values, well, we were starting to see some for less than £1,000, but at the moment it's a bit strange here in the UK. Both new and, well, used car prices in particular seem to have skyrocketed. So you might get an early car with high miles, particularly if it's a category car that's been accident damaged and repaired. You might get one for under £1,000. couple of £1,000 should get you a reasonable car, a similar age and condition to this one. But generally, for a Fiat, residuals are actually quite good on these cars. If you want a new one now, well, if you exclude the electric one, if you want this, or the facelift version of this body style with, I think it's only the 1 litre hybrid you can get now, you're going to be looking around £13,000 to get you into the pop, which these days I think that does come with things like air conditioning as well. And some of the higher spec cars you could be paying 15, 16,000. If you want an electric one, well, you could be looking to the tune of 30,000 for that new model. I've not driven one of those yet, but that looks to be an all new car, so I expect it will feel quite different to this one. I find the retro styling of the 500 quite appealing, from these curvy little mirrors to these retro style door handles. Obviously on this Lounge version you even get the chrome rubbing strips on the front and rear bumpers. Lounge models also got the chrome trim here, and I know a lot of younger buyers perhaps don't like the chrome anymore. I know a lot of people prefer brushed aluminium or even just plain black, but as I say, it's a retro styled car, and retro cars have a lot of chrome. And it's the same story here around the front with these little round headlamps. We've got our daytime running lights and high beams down here as well. These whiskers and this line that mimics the old 500 from the 1950s and 60s. We've even got this little crease in the centre of the bonnet here, which all adds to the retro appeal of this car. Something I actually really like on this one as well is this fixed glass sunroof. Now there was a electric sliding version that you could have if you want open air motoring, or of course there was the 500c convertible, but it really does add a lot of light into the car, especially on a day like today. It makes the car feel much airier inside. Now there's no denying, over the 10 years we've had this vehicle, it really has become like one of the family. It's been reliable, it's always brought us home, and to be honest, I have actually seen a few of these cars that have been involved in some quite serious accidents, either owners club members, young members who've got into difficulty and ended up in a collision, people who've been rear-ended. About 6 months ago I saw a few of these cars had been in a serious collision, and one had ended up on its roof. And the vehicle's main structure had remained completely intact. It was remarkable. Of course, all 500s tend to come with plenty of airbags in them these days. Things like ABS as well, standard, whichever model you buy. Now, little did I know all those years ago when we bought our first Fiat 500 that I was buying into a lot more than just a car. You see, I tended to have larger cars with more power for quite a few years after we bought this, for several years in fact. And I got to a point and I had a Skoda Octavia VRS, and one day I thought, for the cost of this car, I don't feel I'm getting quite the amount of enjoyment I should. Particularly whenever I got back in this car and drove it, it always put a smile on my face. So one day, by chance, I stumbled upon a Fiat 500S, which just so happened to be fitted with the TwinAir 105 engine. Now, these 85 horsepower TwinAirs are really good fun cars to drive, but the 105 had quite a short production run. They didn't arrive until I think around 2014, and probably within less than 2 years they were gone from sale. Both engines produce the same 145 newton meters of torque at 2000 revs, which is what makes them feel so punchy. But the 105 just adds that extra 20 horsepower. But that's not where the real change is, it's in the gearbox, where this car has a 5-speed gearbox The 105 has a 6-speed, and top gear is about the same on both cars, meaning that the 105 has closer ratio gearing, and it does make a difference to the drivability of the car. If you do ever have the opportunity to get a TwinAir 105, then I would suggest you snap it up. But if you can't find one, or you find one that's a bit tatty, and there's an 85 horsepower in better condition, then certainly don't discount it, because these cars really are a bit of a hidden gem. It's one of those things that people will scoff at, but only a TwinAir driver really knows. Neither version is an Autobahn Stormer. Don't get me wrong, they'll still move when you want them to. But if you want a car that's going to put a smile on your face on every drive, every school run, every trip to the supermarket, every journey home from work, then a TwinAir could well be the car for you. Well, I hope this video has proved helpful to you. I'll leave a link, probably somewhere up here, to the video I did previously, which was on my 500S. That was one of the first videos I did, so there are a few audio issues early on, but it does get better, I assure you. If you've enjoyed this, please do give the video a thumbs up. It does mean a lot. Also, let me know what you thought in the comments. If you've any questions about the 500 at all, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments. And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because there will be more videos of this nature coming along, and we've already got a few in the back catalogue as well, that if you haven't seen them already, you may wish to go through and take a look at. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye for now.